Chefs of Reddit, what is the worst and or stupidest accident you've seen in a kitchen? It was myself. Around 7 or 8 years ago I was on the line when somebody knocked an aerosol can of Vegaline into the fryer, and nobody noticed. For about 5 minutes the can heated up until it exploded, sending around 5 gallons of 350-degree oil into the air, and then down onto my hapless self. 2 months in the hospital and 10 hours of skin graft surgery later I finally got to go home from that shift. That sounds intense. I can't imagine going through that kind of pain and recovery. It's wild how quickly things can go wrong in a kitchen. It must have been a tough couple of months. Glad you made it through, though. It's a good reminder to always be careful, especially with heated equipment around. My buddy tossed me a lighter as I was standing next to the deep fryer. I must have had a hole in my hand that day because it sailed straight into the fryer. Luckily I threw a baking sheet on top of the fryer to contain the imminent explosion. Sounds like a close call. It's wild how accidents can happen so quickly. That lighter could have caused a real mess, but good thinking with the baking sheet. Sometimes you just have to react fast. Glad it all turned out okay. Calling me a chef is steep, but first day on the job at Macca's I get a warning on the fryer checkbox when I am about to filter the oil. For context, filtering involves pumping the oil through a box with 2 sieves. I have no idea what it means, so I ask my crew trainer, who says it'll be fine. It usually warns you a few filters before you have to do anything. Just filter it. Next thing I know, boiling oil is flowing out of the bottom of the machine and flooding into the manager's office. Something in the box had clogged and the oil from the last filter hadn't drained. I don't know how neither of us got fired, but I worked there for 2.5 years after that and never spilt a drop of oil again. That sounds like quite the experience. First day on the job and you're already in a messy situation. It's wild how things can escalate so quickly. Glad to hear you didn't get fired and managed to stick around for a while. It's good you learned from that and didn't spill again. Just goes to show that sometimes the craziest beginnings can lead to unexpectedly long tenures. Assistant kitchen manager demonstrated safe and correct mandolin handling techniques on my first day. Assistant kitchen manager sliced tip of thumb off during lesson. Returned from emergency room about 2.5 hours later to finish shift like a boss. That sounds intense for a first day. It's wild how quickly things can go wrong in a kitchen. Props to that assistant kitchen manager for toughing it out and coming back. I guess you learn a lot about safety when you see something like that happen. It's a reminder that working in a kitchen has its risks, but you gotta keep going. Not a chef, but I worked as a server. The kitchen manager decided to use some very heavy-duty drain cleaner on one of our floor drains. Somehow it backed up and came spilling out without anyone knowing. The first one to go into that part of the kitchen was one of our younger servers, probably about 16 to 17. She slipped and fell on the chemicals. Almost immediately she knew something was off, but our manager was a bee, so she kept working through the irritation. Within 30 minutes she ran out and went to the bathroom. Our head chef noticed she was gone for more than 10 minutes and went to the bathroom to yell at her. Instead, she found her bawling her eyes out with some extremely painful chemical burns on her back and legs. They rushed her to the hospital. Only time in 10 years that kitchen fully shut down. She got a big payout because it permanently scarred her, but yeah, none of us stayed there very long. That sounds rough. A friend of mine had a similar experience when working as a server. They had some dangerous incidents in the kitchen too. Nobody really took safety seriously, and it led to injuries. It made everyone rethink their job there. Some ended up leaving. You just don't expect that kind of stuff when you're just trying to work and make a living. Definitely changes your perspective on workplace safety. Back in the 80s, commercial plastic wrap came with a very sharp serrated cutting edge. This one cook, let's call her Jane, was wrapping something when the box of plastic wrap started to fall off the prep table. She tried to catch it with her free hand. She grabbed it by the cutting edge and it just slipped through her palm like a bandsaw. Tons of blood and her palm was split open to the bone. It looked like her palm had degloved. That was the last time I saw or heard from Jane. That's a tough story. Accidents like that can really change everything. Jane was just trying to do her job, and then it turned into something serious. It's wild how a moment of carelessness can lead to such a drastic outcome. I can't imagine what she went through or how it affected her life. Sometimes you just don't realize the risks in everyday tasks. Just shows the need to be careful, I guess. In high school, I worked at the fancy restaurant in my small community of 5,000 people. It was a Swiss restaurant that did wine and fondue and the such. Anyways, our line cook was an experienced chef from Dallas. I have no idea how he ended up in bumfuck Egypt with the rest of us. This dude liked downers. Like really liked downers. He would take Xanax, Hydros, Roxys and then chase them with Adderall so he could have downers and keep working. I guess one day he didn't chase his downer with an upper. It was a busy night in the kitchen and I was at the food prep station near the grill. I turned around with a tub of onions just in time to watch him fall forward onto the flame grill, which was loaded up with searing mignons. Dude didn't even react. Just laid on the grill. Anyways, lots of screaming and a 911 call later, the guy was taken to the closest burn unit, about an hour away. 2-3 burns on most of his chest and face, ended up being intubated in the burn unit for a few days. He never came back after that. I wonder how he is doing. That story is something else. Working in a small community, you hear about stuff like this, but never expect to see it. That line cook must have been in rough shape to not even react. You kind of wonder if he got the help he needed after all that. It's easy to get lost in life's chaos, especially when you're trying to balance substances. Hope he found a way to stay safe after that. Friend is a bartender at a mid to high-end place. They had a dude cleaning the vents over the deep fryers. Standing on a baking sheet propped over the grease. Sheet slipped, foot went in the deep fryer. 3rd degree or more up his whole foot and part of the leg. I asked how the place wasn't sued into the floor. Worker was illegal and it never got reported. Dude just got sent to the and didn't tattle on the restaurant because his brothers still worked there. That's a rough situation. It's wild how things can go so wrong in a kitchen. Makes you realize how much people risk for a job. The loyalty to family is strong, but it's messed up that the restaurant could just brush it off. I guess some places operate in the shadows where safety takes a back seat. Hope that guy heals up okay. Restaurant owner here. Hired someone who had 5 years experience running a fryer and flat top. Asked him if he's cleaned a fryer before and he laughed a bit and said of course he has. This jabroni reached down into the fryer with oil still in and burnt the holy hell out of his hand. When I asked him why he thought he wouldn't get burnt, he told me the stupid fucking thing has been turned off for almost 5 minutes. He put in his 2 weeks notice a month later and gave my spot a 1-star review on Google, smiling face with open mouth and cold sweat. That's wild. Can't believe he thought he'd be fine after just a few minutes. You'd think a fryer comes with some level of caution, especially with that experience. I bet the 1-star review stung a bit, but sometimes people just don't get it. At least he left without causing more trouble. Guess not everyone is cut out for the kitchen life. Not a chef, but was a manager at KFC in the late 1990s, and one of the upright warmers wasn't working and they had the old-school long tube fuses. We were closed and were cleaning the floors, so standing in an inch of soapy water I opened the fuse port and the fuse did not pop out like the inner spring was broken. So I stuck my finger in and tapped the fuse to bump it out while it was still plugged in, not thinking, and it shocked me so bad it knocked me on my ass onto the floor of soapy water. I could feel it in my fillings, and after I came to my teeth and jaw is what hurt the worst. That sounds pretty rough. Working in food service can be intense, especially when you're dealing with electrical stuff. It's wild that you tried to fix the fuse like that. Getting shocked is no joke. It's one of those moments where you learn to be way more careful. Glad you were okay in the end, but I bet it was an experience you'll remember for a long time. I was making some sugar-laced tuile for a dessert and dropped the spatula into the boiling sugar mix. My lizard brain automatically reached for it, covered my index finger in the mix and yanked back because the heat shocked me. It all happened in less than a second, but I completely degloved that finger. That sounds pretty rough. It's crazy how quickly things can go wrong in the kitchen. One moment you're focused on making something nice, and the next you're dealing with an injury. It's a reminder to be careful, especially around hot stuff. Cooking can be enjoyable, but it's also got its risks. I guess you learned the hard way to keep your hands far from boiling sugar. When I was 16, I was working in the back of a Pizza Hut prepping a hot ham sandwich for the oven. Grabbed the hoagie bun, cut it real quick with the knife, questioned why this bread was red, went to toss it in the trash, and checked the rest of the bag to see what spilled on it when I realized the floor around me was red too. Turns out, cutting bread while you're holding it is a dumb as fuck move, lol, said well damn. And my manager turned to get mad at me for saying a curse word at work. When she saw my hand just dumping blood on the ground, she handed me a towel and told me I could go ahead and go home to get it cleaned up. Should have gotten stitches because it was deep as fuck, but I was poor so I just super glued it and wrapped it in gauze. Also dumb move, oh well, you can't even tell now almost 2 decades later, lol edit, seems most people are missing the fuck up. It's not the super glue part that was stupid, it was the wrapping it with gauze too soon and getting gauze super glued into my open wound that sucked, lol. I remember working at a deli in high school. One day, I was slicing some meat and got a bit too confident. Ended up nicking my finger pretty good. Blood everywhere, and I panicked a little. My boss came over, saw the mess, and just had me sit down while he handled it. I ended up with a bandage, but no stitches. Still have the scar. Lesson learned about being careful. Went for drinks with the head chef, got drunk. He didn't work the next day. I had a massive hangover. The sous chef asked me to cut some apples, can't even remember for what. I cut the tip of my left pinky, all the tip. It almost grew all again. I just have a little circle with no sensitivity, but it looks all right. Never went drinking that hard, or at all if I had to work the next day. Never ever again hangover. It became a rule of life. That sounds like a rough night. I've had my share of those. One time, I went out with some friends before an early shift. Ended up feeling terrible at work, like I was in slow motion. Had to serve customers while fighting the urge to sleep. It wasn't pretty. I've learned to avoid drinking hard before work too. It just isn't worth the headache and regret. Cheers to better choices. Not a chef, but one caused it. I was burned by a poached egg. I was in the dish pit after a long brunch shift. I made a wise-ass comment to the chef. He grabbed a leftover poached egg that he thought was cold. It was not, and he was a much better shot than I thought. It hurt, but did get a cold beer to help recover. We were all good. Owner set a new rule: no throwing food in the kitchen. That sounds like a rough day. Getting hit with a hot poached egg is not fun. It's good that you could laugh it off and get a beer to ease the pain. Rules like that usually come from someone learning the hard way. At least you all got along after. Kitchen life can be chaotic, but moments like that keep things interesting. Not a chef, but worked in a kitchen at a fast casual restaurant when I was 18/19. During a lunch rush working the grill, I accidentally set the plastic bottle of oil on the stove instead of on the shelf next to the stove. Melted the bottom of the bottle off, large amount of oil spilled out onto the grill and led to flames a couple feet high. Managed to get it out quick, but gave me and everyone else an absolute heart attack, smiling face with open mouth and cold sweat. That sounds intense. Kitchen accidents can escalate quickly. I remember a similar experience at a friend's barbecue where someone dropped a whole tray of burgers. Everyone froze for a second, then we all just started laughing. Sometimes, those moments bring everyone closer together. Glad you handled it well. It's those little stories that stick with you, even if they make your heart race at the time. For some reason, our pot sink's hot water wasn't working, so the chef filled up one of the giant kettles to bring some water up to the necessary temperature so that I could fill the pot sink up and attack the massive shitshow that had been piling up all day. As I was moving some water from the kettle to the sink in one of our larger pots, it slipped from one of my hands and spilled on my lower leg and foot. I scalded myself rather nicely, and the ensuing peeling phase was rather unpleasant. 0 to 10, would not recommend. Another one from my earlier time in fast food, the MCD's was 2 levels, so the kitchen was above the manager's office and staff break room. The stairway down was covered in a rubber, non-slip tread that was surprisingly slippery. Throw in a pair of shoes coated in kitchen grease and garbage juice, and you've got a recipe for sliding my ass down around 30 steps and crumpling into a ball at the base of the stairs. Also 0 to 10, would not recommend. Sounds like a rough day in the kitchen. Dealing with boiling water and then slipping down the stairs is not a fun combo. Burns and falls definitely don't make for a good time. Glad you made it through, but yeah, definitely wouldn't want to do that again. Just a typical day in fast food, I guess. Keeps you on your toes, for better or worse. So I was a beer delivery driver. I delivered draft beer. I was at a Longhorn Steak House. The morning prep guys were chopping up lettuce for the day's salads. For whatever reason, one of them didn't have the standard cut-proof gloves on and was in a rush. Well, his little finger became part of the salad. Salad? Yeah, that sounds wild. I remember a guy at my old job got a bit careless with a knife too. He was just trying to speed things up, but it went wrong real quick. Everyone freaked out, and they had to call in for a cleanup. It's funny how sometimes the smallest mistake can lead to a massive situation. Just goes to show, always take your time with sharp stuff. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.